Chapter 3. Freedom. Sometimes I wonder what freedom really is. It doesn't seem to exist without some form of responsibility. The times of freedom I remember in my life are when I wasn't really responsible for anyone. Joseph and Lynn Blair sat at the kitchen table early on a Saturday morning. It was early August. It was a typical scene of the start of an American family's day. Coffee was brewing, breakfast, some sort of fruit bar, something quick and easy. The parents of Amy and Matt Blair were hard workers, even now, in their early 50s. Joseph was a plant manager, and Lynn was a nurse at the local hospital, Mercy Hope Medical Center. Both focused on their jobs, yet they did not speak to each other much about their workdays. They found early in their marriage that it didn't work to come home and complain to one another. Both would seem to have the solutions to the other's problems. Being the independent, strong people they were, this would cause many arguments. So, work was not discussed in any great depth at home. Just anything out of the ordinary. For example, working late or business trips. These were mentioned and reasons given for whatever the odd event entailed. They had raised their 2 children in the area outside of Baltimore. Their small town was called Overlea. The family had always lived in this area since the children's birth. Lynn was moved around a lot as a child and thought it important for a family raising children to stay put. A family should plant roots until the children were stable or old enough to be on their own. Joseph had a master's degree in business management and had been offered bigger jobs in New York City and Washington, D.C., but he declined. This may have appeared to be at the request of his wife to keep the family in the rural suburban community. However, Joseph thought it better for the family. He wanted to raise their children as healthy as possible. D.C. and New York City just didn't have as good of schools as there were in the suburbs. In the beginning, the family was barely financially stable. But he and his wife's persistence kept the family where they were. He knew she feared the children growing up in the city, and so they decided to stay in Overlea. The trying times made their relationship even stronger. Now, Joe was glad they had chosen to stay in Overlea. They had a good life and great children. Amy was approaching 18. She got good grades in high school. She graduated somewhere in the middle of her class with an A average. She was working hard this summer, saving for a new car. She was also entering scholarship applications everywhere. She was trying to procure the money to put herself through college. The astronomical tuition costs were nearly impossible to overcome. The debt that would be incurred could never be repaid. And so, this was the only way. She had secured enough to get started, but the quest for the grants and scholarships would continue throughout her college career. Joseph smiled as his beautiful daughter entered the room. "Morning, honey," he said to her. "Hi, Daddy." "Do you have to work today?" "Yeah, noon to 9, she replied. "I have to run some errands before, though." "A letter came from Cincinnati University yesterday," her mother interjected. "Oh, I know. It's my information on my roommate at the dorm," she said in her all-knowing teenage fashion. "You getting excited?" asked her father. "Yeah, I'm going to miss my friends, but I'm ready to get out of this town." The conversation continued as it did each and every morning. Amy left, heading to the gym, then to the post office, among other places. Joseph read the paper, and his wife made her coffee. With his eyes still on the paper, he began to speak with his wife. Matt left last night. He paused. His car is here now, though, he said, in a for your information-like manner. There was a pause. I know. I heard the car last night, too, she said, turning towards him. I wonder where he went. He hasn't left his room in forever. And now he's leaving in the middle of the night? I don't get it. I'm so worried about him. He's been here for 6 months. He seems like he's okay. But he still sits up there, all day. Well, he's been through some rough things, Lynn. He went out last night. Maybe that's a good sign. Joe said, in a more positive tone. He'll come around. I hope, she said, looking into the distance, down into the grain of the oak kitchen table. If he doesn't, I'll get after him. He can't stay up there forever, Joseph said. Now, don't go dwelling on this. He'll be okay. He's a tough kid. I'm not sure what he's thinking, but he'll come. His eyes turned to the steps. They heard someone coming down the staircase. Hey, Matt, his dad said, letting the surprise be obvious in his voice. I didn't expect to see you this early. Yeah, there's some things I have to do, he said as he walked to the cupboard. We've raised some early birds, Lynn, he said to his wife, then back to his son. Your sister already left herself. Oh, yeah? He said, surprisingly interested in his sister's activity. Where'd she go? Ha! His father laughed. I don't know. I can't keep up with that girl. She just had some errands to run, Matt, his mother answered. A few seconds passed as Matt shuffled through the cupboard. I'm going to go on vacation, said Matt, preoccupied with his search for breakfast. I'm going to go check into it. All by yourself? His mother asked, concerned. Good for you, Matt, his dad said supportively. Yeah, out to the mountains, he said. I've got a lot to put behind me. Sounds like a good plan, Matt, his father said, again reading his paper. Matt's mother was concerned. He could tell. However, there wasn't much he could do. After a search back and forth, from the cupboard to the refrigerator, and back again a few times, Matt grabbed an apple. He kissed his mother on the cheek. Love you, Mom, he said. See you, Dad. See you, Matt, his dad said. Matt was out the door. See? Joseph said triumphantly. He's okay. Don't worry, he's got it under control. He walked over to his wife and kissed her on the top of her head. I know, she said, but he's going by himself. I gotta go, he said, as he removed his hands from her shoulders. She smiled, then he. I'll see you tonight, he continued. You have a good day. Bye, hon, she said. Shortly after, she followed the 2 men she loved so much. 2 men, she thought. I guess Matt is a man now, going on vacation by himself. She reconciled her thoughts and went to work. With a renewed sense of hope, Matt was starting again. He would go back to the beginning. When they were kids, his uncle had taken him and his sister to a rodeo, of all things. This rodeo happened to be in Wyoming. The excitement of new and unexplored lands, experiencing the excitement of travel itself, was something that Matt remembered vividly. This was one of his earliest memories. Matt reveled in the sunshine. It caused a squint in his unadjusted eyes. He embraced the spirit of the morning, the daily new beginning. He knew he would always have that to fuel his heart. He sang along with the music on the radio. Matt had booked his travel online the previous night. He headed to pick up the tickets through a local agent. Matt let himself feel free. He had a renewed sense of hope, of love, and the spirit of a champion. He looked at the rearview mirror and caught the corner of his face. He looked at his blue eyes in the mirror. Then he entered his whole face. The light brown hair was neatly combed. He was happy with the way he looked. He was even more proud of the man in the mirror for the new strength he had found. He imagined the view of the mountains and the peace he would find in the purple skies of sunrise, the golden hope of sunset, telling him of his daily new beginning, and that the morning would soon return. Matt looked forward to driving up the mountainside, taking in the scenery, traveling into a small town, starting small talk with the friendly folk, grabbing some groceries to take to his cabin. He would look out at the stars at night, and only then plan his next move. He would be a traveler. Maybe he would write some poetry in some of those old notebooks. Matt made a mental note to grab a sketchbook and some pencils from the drugstore. He could do some sketches of the mountains to take home in his memories from this planned time of peace. The travel agency appeared on his right side. Matt entered the driveway and went inside. The sole employee at the agency seemed a jolly man. It looked like he had done some traveling recently. He had a dark tan. This type of tan would be difficult to achieve in the Baltimore area. Matt showed the email receipt of his purchase. "That will work easy enough," said the man. The flight left August 5th and returned on August 12th. For a brief moment, Matt thought about going to the diner where Stephanie used to work. After all, he was on that side of town. Maybe she still works there, he thought. Matt had not considered attempting to see her. It had been long enough that she seemed a distant, irretrievable memory. He pushed the thought aside, reminded himself that he was moving on. Soon, he would have a new bank of memories, maybe even some happier ones. He retreated to his room to read. Amy approached Green Isle Circle. After a tired and dragging hot summer day, the clouds were pink puffs of smoke in the dusk hour. She looked in the mirror at her light brown hair, deep green eyes. Then, as if deceiving herself, she checked for traffic to the rear of the car, asking that she was really just using the mirror to check herself out. The day was extensive with activities. She sent her college mail out, spent an hour before work working out. Like most girls her age, she was very interested in attention from the opposite sex. Amy worked very hard to achieve the perfect look for the man she dreamed of. Work entailed working at a trendy makeup retailer. She wished she could be a model for the company. She thought that being a sales associate would get her foot in the door. It hadn't worked out the way she wanted. She set aside her dream for an approach safer than chasing this crazy model dream. She would go to college and get her degree. She wanted to get married and live happily ever after. It was old-fashioned, but it was what she wanted. She was happy. She didn't have a drive to be more than she was. Amy had a slow burn of a crush with Justin Sampson. He was perfect in her eyes in every way. He met all the criteria of her fantasies. They had hung out a few times with their groups of friends. They hadn't had a date, though, not just the two of them. She would be leaving for college in just a couple of weeks anyway. Amy knew that upon returning home, there would be strange happenings. Her brother left late the night before. It had been strange since he got back, she thought. He didn't seem to be there sometimes. He demanded that he had no visitors. People who actually came anyway were left outside his bedroom door, knocking. He wouldn't open the door. Matt hadn't left the house once since he got home. He had no visitors. And there were many times when she thought she heard him talking to himself in his room. In a way, she was happy that he was up, leaving in the middle of the night. Maybe he was going back to the old Matt. Counselors came to the house to speak with him. He wouldn't participate. He sat there like a vegetable, refusing to even acknowledge their questions. In truth, he should have been dead. When she heard about him getting shot, she feared the worst. It was very hard to see her brother like this. Her counselor told her to give him time. Traumas like this only healed in time. An anticipation arose from her subconscious. She pulled into the drive. Amy noticed that Matt's car was not in its usual spot, as it had been for years. It had been moved. It sat parked on the road in front of the house. He must have gone out again, she thought. Now she wanted to know everything. What was happening with her brother? She loved him. She had been worried about him. They had shared few words. He was very secluded from the rest of the family. The words they shared were words of a maturing brother-sister etiquette. Amy's pace quickened in getting to the front door. She entered. Her father sat on his chair in the living room, absently engulfed at the flat panel affixed to the wall. He watched his favorite news stream. He turned and smiled at her. "Hey, honey," he said. "Hey, Daddy. How's it going?" "Pretty good. Did you have a good day?" She set her purse and keys to the right of the door. There was a bench that sat there. "Sure. Hey, Mom." Amy's mother sat in the den connected to the living room. "Hey, Amy," she said, her face in her reading device. She had red reading glasses on. Amy approached the kitchen, walked to the cupboard. She grabbed the glass and filled it with water. She turned around, leaning against the sink ledge. Amy heard her father's raised voice from the other room as she thought, should I just go up to his room and knock? He might throw a fit like he did when he first came back. His voice was directed towards her. "Hey, honey, your brother's leaving for vacation tomorrow," her father said, as a matter of factly. "So before you go to bed, make sure and tell him to have a good trip." "Vacation? What? What?" she exclaimed. "He hasn't left the house in forever. Vacation?" There was no real response. She assumed her father's attention was blankly locked onto the television screen. Similarly, her mother's in the words of her book. After a moment, she turned and placed her glass upside down in the sink. She headed back towards the front door, picked up her purse, and double-stepped it up the staircase. Matt's room before her. She slowed. Amy gazed curiously through the crack of the door. She saw her older brother's figure. He was a blur, moving past the opening. She paused, as if listening would provide her with some clue to what he was doing. It did. He was packing. She knocked. "Hey," he said. "Come on in." Amy entered the room and stood near the door. She left it half open, as if she was making a minimum of her disturbance. She realized that she had never really been in her brother's room. She quieted her discomfort and spoke. "So I hear you're going on vacation," she said, in a questioning tone. "Yep, I'm going out to Wyoming. I need some peace before I move on with this whole spiel." It seemed he wasn't talking to her, just thinking out loud. "Wyoming?" she asked. Matt stopped, looked at her. "Yeah. Do you remember when Uncle Tom took us out there? We were kids?" Amy ruffled her brow. "Matt, I was like 4 or 5. "Oh," Matt responded. "Right. Well, that sounds great." Amy tried to keep the conversation going. "We've been worried about you, Matt. This kind of seems like an impulsive thing to do. Don't you think?" she asked. "Well, Ames, I've had a lot of time to think." Matt sounded slightly defensive. "And this is just what I need. I always wanted to be in more wide open spaces. You know, where there's more peace than person. You're going all by yourself? She asked, concern in her eyes. Matt looked at his sister and smiled. Who else would I go with, Ames? Oh, I don't know. She paused. I thought that maybe you would, get a hold of Stephanie. Matt stopped packing for a brief second, then began again. I'm not going to lie. I guess I've thought about it, he said, but I'm best by myself right now. Who knows what she's up to anyway? Amy sat on the bed, Matt on the floor. I do, Amy said. I don't want to know, Matt said, shaking his head. You don't, Amy said. Matt didn't have a reply. It was hard to judge from his body language whether she should say more or not. Are you feeling better? She asked. Yeah, still a little tender, but better. There was a pause. So, do you think you'll ever look Stephanie up again? I don't know, Ames, Matt replied. Why do you keep bringing her up? I haven't seen her in more than 3 years. I think it would be best. I saw her, Amy said, interrupting him. Matt stared back. Where? At the fair, back in June, Amy said. Didn't Mom tell you? Matt rolled his eyes. No, she didn't. Well, I think you should know. No, Matt replied. I shouldn't. Matt was surprised at his will. He didn't even want to know what Amy was about to tell him. Amy sighed and shook her head. So you're really going to do this vacation thing? She asked, changing the subject. Matt nodded. You won't get lonely? Nah, I'm tough, he answered with a smile. This was the big brother she knew. He was still in there. He returned to packing. It was clear to Amy that he was packing in a disorganized and scattered fashion, and so she decided he needed help. Amy took over. Soon, Matt was sitting and she was packing. The military fashion of organizing your personal belongings seemed to escape Matt pretty quickly. Their father popped his head through the door. Hey guys, we'll see you in the morning. What time are you leaving tomorrow? He asked. Early, Matt answered. Okay, he nodded. Well, if I'm not up, say goodbye to me and your mother. Okay, Dad. Night, Matt replied. Good night, Ames, her father said. Night, Daddy. Joe left the room and entered his bedroom. His wife lay, already sleeping. Gently, he shook her. He propped himself up on his elbow. Lynn, he whispered. She woke, slowly opening her eyes. What, hon? She said, closing them again. Did you see those two in there? Yeah, she smiled. Her eyes still closed. I think Amy is helping him pack, he said in a whisper of disbelief. Yeah, she was. Isn't that sweet? Yeah, he said, laying down. I love having them both back home with us. Good night, Joe. Then she kissed him on the cheek. Night, he said. He let the thought pass with him into sleep. After finishing packing, Amy and Matt continued their talk. Wow, Matt said. I guess I didn't realize how much I've missed. Well, there's still time to make it up to me, Amy responded. The conversation took them through their teenage years. Stories of high school, ex-girlfriends, boyfriends, and crazy nights with friends. Some nights were close calls with the authorities. Soon, they were sitting on the front porch, each enjoying the evening and the lore of their closing childhoods. The night was picturesque, a lidless sky exposing the vast and distant lights of the heavens above. In a way, the open sky seemed to play a part in the opening of their hearts. To both, it was evident they were growing up. The future truly felt unwritten. It was as if two stars, long separated, had been rejoined, resulting in a brilliant collision in the celestial theater above. Amy and Matt felt the brilliance of that collision in their hearts now. Both could deeply feel a love for one another. This could be the last time they would have the moment to connect in this way. Nights like these couldn't be forced. They were rare, and they only happened when they happened. Amy's love was one of admiration, concern, and endless caring for her brother. She learned of how Matt's relationship with Stephanie had broken his heart, how the heartbreak caused him to make the hasty decision to join the World Police Force. Amy was concerned for his impulsivity in his current situation to go on vacation alone. She worried that he might find himself lonely and depressed, isolated, and far away from home. Matt assured her that he was doing this as an act of healing. It was not an escape, as was his decision to join the WPF. After tonight, their paths would take them far from one another. This fact made it even more special for them. The freedom of youth was flowing in their blood. Each had the space and liberty to make their own decisions. They both had the capability to take their life in whatever direction they chose. This was their commonality. In this moment, the light of the sky above shone only on them. You know, Ames, this is probably the last time we'll get to talk for a while, Matt said. I'm leaving for vacation, you for school. His glance lit his face across the street. The platinum silhouette of an old willow tree stood in the neighbor's yard. Yeah, she said, chasing his glance. I'll tell you what, Matt said excitedly. When we both make something out of our lives, let's do this again. Just sit and talk slow about whatever. Deal? Amy smiled. Of course. Matt put out his hand for a shake, had a mocking smile. She laughed. They shook on it. You'd better go to bed. You gotta get up early tomorrow, Matt said. So do you, she said challengingly. What time are you leaving? The flight leaves at 0400, 4 a.m. I'm just gonna stay up tonight. I've slept enough this year. But you'd better sleep. Okay. Good night, Matt. Amy paused at the door. She wanted to tell her brother that she loved him. Even in the magic of their moment, she could not do so. Yet, Matt knew. He could see it in her. Good night, Ames, he said. Somehow, the magic of the moment prevailed. Amy knew that her brother knew what she was thinking, and she knew he felt the same. Amy walked up the stairs to her room. The day had worn her out. With only the warmth of the love for her brother, she retired. Their talk had extended her day. After a brief recollection of the evening, sleep took her. Matt remained on the front porch. He had savored the moment he shared with his sister. He was facing forward now. A bright future lay before him, in which he had the controls. He would steer himself in the direction of smiles. Matt was free for the first time in his young life. And on the front porch of his parents' house, taking in the night, he reflected. He noted how grateful he was for his time with his sister. And so, Matt spent his last night home before his healing vacation. Aileen Carlisle turned on the light to her one-bedroom apartment. She carried her large purse and a large bag filled with all of her supplies. She had to haul these supplies back and forth to the kindergarten classroom each day. Today had been another busy day. Her summer class had traveled to the nature center. Here, she had to help keep track of 10 little kindergartner-age students. She only had the help of her 17-year-old assistant, Stella. Stella really wasn't that much of a help. She spent most of her time messaging her boyfriend instead of helping out. Aileen had words with her today. Lynn told her that she'd better start helping. Otherwise, she was going to have to find a new helper. It was obvious. Stella didn't want to be there anyway. Her parents were the sole reason behind this summer job. Instead of Stella being their problem for the summer, she had become Aileen's. Aylin had a tan t-shirt on, a white headband, and cut-off jean shorts. She kicked off her flip-flops, threw her bags on the couch, and walked into the kitchen. She opened the fridge. Getting a half-full bottle of Riesling out, she poured the remnants of the bottle into a glass. She looked down at her dirty t-shirt and swiped at it, trying to make it look clean. Of course, one of the kids' mother threw a fit about how dirty he was after the trip today. Maybe they were quite dirty, and she just didn't realize. She sighed and shook her head. She'd have to do it all again tomorrow. Aylin walked into the bathroom and turned on the shower. She stripped off her shirt and bra, scratching at where the strap had made an indent on her tanned summer skin. She threw them to the closet floor, aiming for the basket. It was already overflowing with clothes. Her underwear would have just rolled out anyway. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. It steamed over from the hot water from the shower. She had slight bags under her eyes. She pulled her golden hair back and took a closer look. This is no good, she thought. Aylin hadn't been sleeping well. She was young, 23. She was working her summer away, babysitting these little kids. She loved it. She really did. But between the kids and working as a waitress on the weekends, she had no time to actually enjoy the summer. But she had to afford her rent. More importantly, she had to be able to afford tuition for grad school in the fall. Aylin would begin her master's degree in childhood education then. It was just sort of what she was always supposed to do. She was okay with that. Aylin had a good life. She worked hard, had plans for the future. She didn't need to be rich or famous. She just wanted to make a difference. Aylin cut the water in the shower and wrapped the towel back around herself. She heard a ringing and a vibration noise from the next room. Who could it be? She wondered. She ran to her phone, picked it up. She didn't recognize the number. She sent the call to voicemail. As soon as she got the alert, she listened. Hey, it's Jeremy Ward. I don't know if you remember me, but we went to high school together. Anyway, I'm back in town, and I wanted to get in touch with you. Give me a call back when you get a minute. Wow, Jeremy Ward? It was definitely a little strange that he was calling her. It was strange that he was calling her at all, let alone at this hour. Aylin hadn't had the attention of a boy in a long, long time. Maybe this is just what she needed. A date. Even if it was just as friends, it would be someone to converse with, other than a 6-year-old. She'd have to wait for a few days, but maybe, just maybe, she'd return Jeremy's call. They had run into each other earlier in the week. Well, they passed each other at the supermarket. Aylin wasn't sure if he recognized her. As they passed, it was a smile and a hello, but she hadn't given him her number. Perplexing, she thought. She sat on the couch. Maybe she should just call him back. Right now. After all, there was no other summer romance going on. No, she couldn't be that forward. It just wasn't her. But who would have given Jeremy her number? Her phone rang again. The ID read, Mom. Hi, Mom, she answered. I ran into someone the other day. You'll never guess who. Aylin laughed at the predictability of her mother. She sighed. I don't know, Mom. Jeremy Ward? How do you know? Well, I was just sitting here thinking, how did Jeremy Ward get my number? When you call and ask me who I think you ran into the other day. He's back in town. He's teaching at a high school out in St. Paul. You two would be great for each other, her mother excitedly said. Aylin was not so excited. Listen, Mom, I don't need you to play matchmaker for me. I'm doing fine on my own. Oh? Then why are you single? There it was. Listen, Mom, please don't give my number out. It's weird. I need to let you go. Bye. There was what started like an argument on the other end, but Aylin hung up. She sighed and looked around the room. Where did I put my Riesling? This has been a presentation of The Landscape of a Heart, an audio novel. Chapter 3, Freedom. Stay tuned next week for Chapter 4, Flight. Copyright 2020, R.P. Watts. Please subscribe to this feed.